the cancer is like the thing you dread and you want to get rid of. But it was, for me, the cancer opened the door to this vast amount of healing that I suspect would have never occurred for me had I not walked through the cancer 3 times. And I'm going to give you like just a couple of details and background on myself. I grew up in a family that was deeply troubled, and there was a lot of violence and a lot of alcoholism. There were guns, there was blood, there was drowning. It was very intense. And so when I became a grown-up, I was completely terrified and totally convinced that the world was a completely unsafe place, and that at any moment God was going to kill me. I had this profound misunderstanding about the divine and my spiritual connection in life. And it all came from feeling totally unsafe, and that the second I relax and surrender, the rug's going to be pulled out from underneath me and I'm going to be killed. And the interesting thing is I never thought that I would be killed by a person, which is kind of curious because there was so much violence in the house when I was growing up. It kind of seemed logical that I would think that. But that isn't what happened. I was terrified that a disease would kill me. And then, as irony would have it, the thing I dreaded the most was getting cancer, and for the first time, it's been maybe 15, 16 years ago, that was the first cancer that I had. And I had no spiritual connection at that time in my life. And I was just terrified and gripped by fear constantly and in this state of panic all the time about the cancer and about dying. But something very deep inside of me knew that this was probably not my time to die. But the fear and the panic layered over that little glimmer of knowing. And so I could only hear it on occasion. It was definitely not the part of me that was leading the way. The panic was leading the way. So I survived that cancer, and then about 6 years ago now, I think it was, maybe I'm going on 7 years, I got a second cancer. By the way, the first one was cervical cancer. The second cancer was breast cancer. And went through a vast amount of healing and understanding and learning in a much more conscious way with that cancer than I did the first time. And what I came to know was that being able to access the deeper understanding in my heart and in my soul was going to be the guiding light for me, and that I was continuing to be yanked and pulled and directed by the fear and the panic. But by this time I had some skills and a spiritual path, and I had ways of being with that diagnosis that led me to clarity and more peace. And I saw that it's about the quality and not the quantity, meaning I didn't need to follow every single recommendation that everybody made for me and read every article and look at every website and go to this group and that group, that I didn't need to do any of that. What I needed to do first and foremost was to learn how to be deep in my heart and know what was true for me. And because of the adverse circumstances in growing up, I completely lost myself, and I had no idea who I was and what was true for me. So it was especially through the second cancer diagnosis that I started to reclaim that and started to understand that I know, that I can trust that I know what I know. So then I had a little over a year ago, the third cancer, which was malignant melanoma in situ. And it's really interesting. One of my caregiving clients, who's quite elderly, was sitting with me one afternoon and was kind of examining my face and looking at me, and she saw this scar on my face from the melanoma, and she said, "Are you wearing a mask?" And I just realized right now as I'm talking that that is a metaphor for the healing that occurred for me with the third cancer diagnosis. Because another layer of a mask, another layer of things that weren't true for me came off. And I had many aspects of healing for myself that occurred from the third diagnosis of cancer. But the one that seemed most poignant and profound for me was that I understood that it no longer served me to try and figure out where I got this notion that at any moment God was going to kill me. And it's not that I thought about that every day and spent hours and hours of time thinking about it, but when life would get really hard and I would feel really frightened, I would ponder that and I'd think, how did I ever get that idea? And I just could never, my mind never felt satisfied. I couldn't come up with any explanation. So it was through the third cancer diagnosis that I got it in a really big and deep way, that, you know what, it doesn't matter how I arrived at that conclusion. And not only does it not matter, but the more energy I put in trying to unravel it and figure it out, the bigger it becomes. And the bigger it becomes, the more it takes away from instead of supporting my healing. So that was a very profound thing for me. And I had a meltdown of a lot of tears as I was getting ready to have the treatment for the melanoma on my face. And I called a friend of mine and was really in a total place of terror and panic. And she said, "Linda," she said, "there's a lot of chaos in your life right now because you have this third cancer diagnosis, and it's a frightening thing, but it doesn't mean that your life is going to end." And somehow it's like God gave her the perfect thing, the perfect food that my heart needed to taste in that moment. And when she said that to me, the whole thing lifted right off of me. And I had no more terror, and I had the peace again. And it was also in that conversation that I had the understanding that it no longer behooves me to keep trying to figure out how I got this notion that at any moment God's going to kill me, nor any other misunderstandings and stories that my mind had been carrying for decades, that the more I thought about it and the more I tried to analyze it, the bigger it became and the more it took away from my healing. So that's my story.